Welcome to week 4 of Cultures in Conflict. This week we will be discussing cultural fluency and what that means to our interactions with and assumptions about the world at large. This week our authors begin with a deeper discussion on cultural fluency. We learn that cultural fluency evolves through the development of 4 capacities, which evolve as a result of experience with the diversity of others, especially when those experiences challenge our own norms. The first capacity we are introduced to is anticipatory capacity. Anticipatory capacity is our readiness to expect a range of possible scenarios about how our future relationships might evolve, often with uncertainties and surprises unfolding moment by moment. Basically, what this means is we will often anticipate or predict what our relationship is going to be based on our own norms or experiences in life. The second capacity to discuss is the capacity of embeddedness. Embeddedness is when cultural habits are submerged into our subconscious and become so routine we no longer even think about them. We just play them out subconsciously. Embeddedness can cause challenges to our cultural fluency in that we must be conscious of the capacity, and through that consciousness we must merge new information about ourselves and others in order to achieve cultural fluency. The next capacity to discuss is the capacity of expressiveness. Expressiveness is just what it says. It is one's ability to explain or express unwritten rules that we consider common sense to those who don't share the same cultural starting points as us. The final capacity discussed is navigational capacity. Navigational capacity is one's ability to put themselves in a position in order to ensure a constructive future. This is done through ensuring there is a productive connection with others. Our text tells us we can develop our cultural fluency with the recognition and development of these 4 capacities, which will allow our self-awareness to improve. The result allows us to cultivate our inner observer, so that we are not only making choices about behaviors and interpretations of those behaviors, but we're also monitoring those choices and behaviors in parallel. We go on to learn that this will allow us to hone our abilities to self-observe and see patterns and habitual ways of responding, and also notice choice points where we might wish to respond differently. In short, what we have learned is by recognizing and embracing these 4 capacities, we will improve our self-awareness, which in turn will allow us to recognize when our starting points are in conflict with other starting points, and to at least consider responding in a different manner than we might have if we didn't understand or embrace those capacities. Moving forward, our authors spend the rest of the chapter telling of their experiences during the research for this text and how those experiences relate to the 4 capacities. We are going to review the lessons learned from these experiences. However, I'm not going to regurgitate the stories outlined in the text. I expect you to read those stories that lead up to these lessons, and as I said, we'll simply review what they wrote about. Our authors provide one story for each of the 4 capacities we've been introduced to. Our authors used their experiences in Rwanda for this capacity. As a result of this experience, in an effort to improve the writer's anticipatory capacity, they asked the following questions regarding the formality they observed in their interactions in Rwandan culture. First, what about my cultural lens through which I was perceiving the image of Rwandan formality and authoritativeness? Second, how were my personal cultural assumptions interacting with the Rwandan meaning-making patterns as they relate to the Rwandan formality and authoritativeness? In a nutshell, our authors recognize that in their Rwandan experience, their perceived misjudgment or their cultural assumptions of that society's formality and authoritativeness initially caused them to view that group of people in an inaccurate manner, which ultimately, at least at first, interfered with the development of the author's cultural fluency. Next, our authors use their experience in Bosnia for the capacity of embeddedness. This experience was interesting, as it addressed an issue that seems to be on the forefront in America today. The issue is that of truth and one's perception of it. Our authors express an interesting phenomenon when they state that their instinct on truth was that a common thread somehow connected all experiences to a specific matter. What the authors learned through this experience is that truth is influenced by many things, to include traumatic life experiences, religion, education, and family background, to name a few. Our authors go on to tell us that while there are many beliefs on truth, they point to 2 that are commonly accepted in academia: rationalism and relativism. Rationalism claims that there is a single standard of truthful knowledge, just as there is one sun and one moon. Or are there? Relativism claims that the universally valid standard for truth exists irrespective of human perception to recognize the standard. What this means is that relativists believe there can be more than one truth based on one's perceptions, and those multiple truths can coexist. As a result of this experience, in an effort to improve the writer's embeddedness capacity, they ask the following questions regarding truth in culture. First, once an established pattern of thinking or feeling is embedded in one's meaning-making process, it is difficult, maybe even impossible, to change that meaning-making process, thus making interaction with different cultures difficult. The culturally constructed perceptions one harbors are always relative, which should teach us to be humble and self-reflective when interacting in cross-cultural settings. Also, we must remember that cultural influences are multi-layered. Otherwise, one's cultural lenses, or how we see things as a result of cultural influences, are influenced by many things such as life experiences, religion, education, and family background. Next, one of our authors uses his personal experience of marrying a lady from a culture of Taiwan, which was different than his, which was Japanese, and how the different cultures' ideas of what a wedding should be as opposed to what he and his wife-to-be envisioned it as being. Through this experience, our authors discuss the capacity of expressiveness. As a result of this experience, in an effort to improve the writer's expressiveness, they made the following observations regarding the successfulness or failure of one's development of expressiveness in a given situation, especially when that situation presents change or challenges to one's cultural fluency. Expressive capacity is developed as a result of a sustained effort to develop one's self-awareness. To be successful, one must be willing to accept feelings that are embedded in our means-making processes, even though those feelings may be seen as indescribable. We must understand there are some cognitive and emotional processes that are shared by all cultures. However, there are also many that are not, so therefore we should never assume a process is shared. As we work to build our expressive capacity, which requires a cognitive effort, we can bridge the gap between our own and others' meaning-making processes. To close out the chapter, our authors emphasize several concrete steps that develop our cultural fluency for the 4 dimensions we have discussed. On page 79, there are 5 steps recommended to help build anticipatory capacity. On pages 79 and 80, there are 5 steps recommended to help understand embeddedness. And on page 80, there are 3 steps recommended to help develop expressiveness. Finally, on page 80, there are also 3 steps recommended to help expand navigational capacities. Have a wonderful week 4. Don't forget to get an early start on your midterm project in addition to your usual weekly assignments. If you need help or advice, please contact your instructor or your student advisor.